Hello everyone and welcome to the Property Journey podcast, beginner to expert. My name is Chris Stewart and today I'm joined by Roy Dougan, my co-host. And hopefully we will be bringing you a lot more about the property journey. So a little bit about what the property journey means. Obviously we're going to be talking about the full property journey, whether that means you're involved in first time buyer, you're a home mover, or also you are going to be investing. Obviously we'll not be giving out financial advice, but we will be just talking a little bit more about the process. For me, I am the beginner. I would say it was only 12 weeks ago that I really became known.
That's right, yeah, 12 weeks.
In the conveyancing process. So the beginner part comes from me. Roy is the expert.
Well, yes, I've been involved in property for the best part of 12, 15 years now. So I have been personally involved in buying houses, selling houses, refurbishing houses, a self-build as well. And then I also deal with home movers, builders and developers as well.
So like in that sense that we will hopefully be able to bring more information to people, that's kind of the key. For me anyway, the things I've noted down a couple of things about what we want to talk about in the first episode here, which is the introduction. So that you can kind of get to know who we are and what we'll be looking to do. But it's more about what we want to be able to achieve. So for myself anyway, it's more gathering that knowledge of buying a house and the process and understanding how to be able to do that, as well as then obviously looking at what would I do. For example, if I bought a house, I'm not really happy with it, thinking about moving to another area, how that process then happens. And then also further down the line, we see a lot of people talking about investing in property and what way maybe further down the line that would maybe look at as well. So for me personally, that's kind of what I would look to achieve out of this anyway. And yourself?
No, well, it's good to pass on the experience and the knowledge that I have. Conveyancing or property transactions is all that I do in the legal world. It's something that I have a passion for, and it's something I aspire to make the process as simple and as stress-free as possible for anybody involved.
And like, would you say at the minute, Roy, that the property conveyancing process would be classified as difficult, or?
It certainly has its complications. The problem is there's so many people involved in a transaction, from surveyors to mortgage brokers to banks themselves to estate agents to solicitors. So there's just so many people involved, government departments as well, and there's so many cogs, and the more cogs that you have involved in any matter, it just becomes more complicated.
Yeah.
Now what we have found is post-COVID the process has got longer, and I suppose maybe a reason for that is staff issues throughout the whole industry. Throughout a lot of industries at the minute there's a shortage of staff, and that's having a big knock-on impact as well. So having a longer process certainly doesn't help. Just the longer process gives people more time to think about, is this going to happen? They get more stressed about it. So my ambition is to try and keep that as stress-free, and hopefully try and cut down the time on the process.
And like that, I suppose that's the thing, these processes can probably change as time goes on. As you say there, during COVID, obviously things happened, and then that now has an implication on the way that the conveyancing process happens. So probably for me, what would be the definition of conveyancing? Because when you kind of throw conveyancing out there and people don't maybe understand, for example, my part maybe 6 months ago, if you had asked me what conveyancing was, I would have looked at you with three heads, so like what kind of is the term that you could say conveyancing?
Well, conveyancing, I suppose anybody in the industry is well aware of what it is, and I suppose gets a wee bit just used to it and maybe doesn't explain it. But I appreciate having dealt with yourself and dealing with first-time buyers to having a clue what conveyancing is and what a conveyancer does.
Yeah.
So a conveyancer is somebody who goes through legal paperwork and basically processes it, particularly buying a house, selling a house, and signs off on it and completes it. In England, and throughout the rest of the British Isles you have a conveyancer, which is somebody who's trained up. But in Northern Ireland it's a different process in that you can only be a solicitor. So it's only a solicitor in Northern Ireland that can complete the conveyancing process.
So essentially, if I was buying a house in England, for example, I technically wouldn't have to go to a solicitor as such?
Not particularly, no. So you can go to, there are specialists or people who are trained up and they just convey the property to you, and they have a license for doing that, and it's very straightforward. But in Northern Ireland it's a solicitor.
Well, I suppose because like I was sitting thinking it's essentially like you kind of, rather than going to law school as such, you kind of could go and do a course. That's it. You go through the different aspects of conveyancing, then you become a qualified conveyancer.
Yeah.
Whereas over in NI, then it's a solicitor. You technically still have to go to law school and then go through the format that way.
Exactly.
So I suppose then, what is conveyancing? It's that process. There's many different people involved. I know you've mentioned a few.
Mm-hmm.
And over the course of this podcast as well, we're going to be hoping to get a number of guests in, those people that are involved in the process, to see their outlook on the conveyancing process and their vision and how they see the process currently. So like, what types of people do you have to work with when you're trying to sort out, someone's property transaction? If someone's came to you and says, I want to be able to buy a house,
Mm-hmm.
you're obviously the person then that's trying to sort the paperwork, that's to try and basically bundle everything together. So what types of people do you have to deal with then over the course of the weeks?
Well, this is maybe where the complications arise. So for instance, if I'm acting for a purchaser, that means, so I'm the purchaser solicitor. Generally and strictly speaking, the only person that I'm dealing with is the seller solicitor, and that's it. There's only the two of us. It's only the two of us that communicate with each other, but yet there's all those other people involved, and they have all their many tasks to do, and it's only coming back to that one solicitor or myself. So you can understand, if you're trying to organise a team to do something, and there's 50, 60 people on the team, but none of those 50 or 60 people are talking to each other, it's just obviously chaos is going to happen.
A recipe for disaster.
Yeah, but what we try to do as a good conveyancer, a good solicitor, will try and get involved and pull together maybe core people or create a core team. So for instance, your mortgage broker, you speak with them to try and liaise, where is the mortgage application, has the surveyor been out to the property, are there any queries? And if you have an issue with the mortgage offer, you're going straight to the broker, who could maybe fast track things or find out a bit more information maybe sooner. Likewise, then you can speak with the estate agent. You have them on board because they maybe have a direct link with the other party. And if there's a bit of a chain, that estate agent might be involved in that chain as well,
Mm-hmm.
which allows you then to jump down the chain 2 or 3 to find out what exactly is happening. So by pulling together that core, it certainly speeds up and smooths the process.
And looking sort of, I suppose, from my point of view, if I was going to buy a house now, and I'm looking around and I'm looking at different websites, there's local estate agents that I'm going to look at, and I found the dream home that I want to go and buy.
Mm-hmm.
What do I do?
Well, the first thing is you want to make sure you can afford to buy the property. So by speaking to a mortgage advisor or a bank, they can do a bit of research and a preliminary confirmation as to how much money you can borrow, and from that, how much money you can borrow, how much deposit have you got, that will tell you how much of a house or the value of the house that you can actually buy in the first place.
So essentially, step one would be kind of looking at the financial side,
the figures.
Yes. So go to a mortgage advisor, figure out kind of, here's my income, here's what I'm bringing in every month or every week.
Yes.
Here's my outgoings, this is what I owe.
Yeah.
And they can come up with a figure and kind of go, right, you could maybe get a mortgage of in and around 150,000, say.
Similar to buying a car, when you go and buy a car, you just don't go and pick the nicest one. You don't pick the biggest one. You first of all look at a budget, and then you look at the practicalities. So with a car, you're looking at what size is it. Do you need a small car? Do you need a big car? What's it going to cost to maintain, to look after? Those sorts of things. Take that mindset to buying a house as well. You just don't go and buy the nicest house that's out there. You want to make sure, is it in the area that suits you? Is it close to you? Does it have the correct number of bedrooms, for instance, or the right size for you? And ultimately, what's the upkeep of it going to be? There's no point buying a big house if you're maybe only living by yourself. It's going to be a fortune to keep.
And I think we had touched, or in a previous conversation that we had we had touched about making sure that the house that you're looking at tailors to your lifestyle as well. And if you like to go out on a Saturday night, you want to maybe make sure that your house is close to a town centre, or you're able to get transport back and forward to the house, or whatever it happens to be. So figures first.
Likewise, if you pick too big of a house, it's going to cost you too much, and then you're going to have no lifestyle on a Saturday night. So it's all within reason.
Saturday night's ruined then, so it is.
All within reason.
You might be able to go out for one pint then, and that's the height of it. You're away back home again. So figures first, and then we're looking at kind of, I suppose then you could maybe go back to the estate agent, or looking at what properties are on the market then, and kind of beginning to fine tune. These are within my budget, these are going to fall outside of my budget, and kind of begin to look specifically then at what types of property are going to suit you. So I've went back and I've done that. What do I do next? I found the property that I want. Do I speak to the estate agent?
Yes, so the estate agent then, so the house will have been listed and it'll have a price. So it's a matter of, you speak with the estate agent. If there's no offers on the house, then it's up to you to make an offer. You'll be guided by the estate agent. They'll tell you it's going to be offers around, so that could maybe mean you could put an offer in slightly lower, or it might just be a starting price off a particular price. But generally, the estate agent will guide you on that, and you place your offer. If it is the case whereby maybe the house has a bit of demand and there's a few other people interested, well then yes, you get a few bids. You're going to put an offer in, another person who's interested, they'll put an offer in, and over the last 18-24 months we've heard about bidding wars. So that simply means if there's 2-3 people mad keen on a house, everybody keeps putting in bids, and the price can go up and up and up.
So essentially, I've seen a house that's being advertised, for example, 150,000. Someone could obviously put a bid on saying that they really like it, 155. If I really want that, I could go 160, and they could come back and just go 170. So essentially what you've got then is that house is being bought for £20,000 more than what the asking price was.
Yes, technically, so that a property is worth what somebody is willing to pay on the open market. Now, thankfully, there is a safety net in place. So, for instance, you could bid up, and it goes that far. But whenever you go and get your mortgage offer, the bank will send out a valuer just as a safety net to make sure you haven't paid too much. So the bank will actually reaffirm whether you've paid the correct price. Well, they're not saying that you paid the correct price, but it's a safety net to make sure that you're not paying too much for it.
For example, I've just paid £170,000 for a house that really and truly is maybe only worth 120 or 125.
Yes.
So once that kind of happens, and obviously bidding wars, they could happen on any property, or you might be lucky and strike gold and get a property for maybe slightly cheaper than what's being advertised. It really depends, I suppose, on what your first initial bid is and what the demand is for the houses in that area. What way do you kind of, you mentioned there, like the bidding wars and the demand for property, is that something since sort of COVID times, has the property market, has there been a higher demand for property? I know that can change in certain areas, and certain areas maybe in high sought after areas, people will pay more for properties in that area, and hence the price goes up. But is there more of a demand for housing in Northern Ireland as a whole?
Well, there's been a few changes. Historically, the property market was very seasonal. So during the winter months it was much quieter. So people weren't interested in maybe perhaps moving house in the dark winter months. So that could have been the right time of year to maybe get a bargain as such, if you want to put it that way. But likewise, there was fewer properties on the market, and then traditionally coming into spring and summer, that was always the busiest time.
Mm-hmm.
Post-COVID, there literally hasn't been a let-up for almost 2 years until about October, November last year, where things did pull back a little bit more to normal. But there is a demand. There's a massive demand for properties. There's a shortage of properties. So, during the last recession, there was a period of a good maybe 5, almost 10 years where there's quite a few houses not being built where they should have been built. So the population has grown. There's a lot of people mad looking to buy houses, and there's not enough property there. So it's all supply and demand. If you have a lot of people interested and you've only a small number, then that just pushes the price up.
And hence then why I've been reading probably news articles and stuff about there's not even enough properties for renters and people that are looking for rental properties, and it's all feeding in that way as well.
Yeah.
Hence why prices of properties have continued to rise then.
Exactly.
So, and that, I suppose that's not being negative either, because you can hear now a lot of new properties are being built as well, new build estates, and that's something we've talked about again on a personal level, that there's a lot more kind of new build estates coming through and stuff like that as well. So again, I suppose back to the conveyancing process as such, we've put the bid on and we've been accepted. At what stage then do I begin to look for, at that stage I suppose it would be a solicitor?
So if the property's been sale agreed to you, it's very exciting. So you've got confirmation that the seller has accepted your offer. So now is the process of actually moving on and buying the property.
Yeah.
So you have 2 people to get speaking to. The first one is a mortgage advisor or a mortgage broker. So basically they're generally the same. So you can go to an advisor who is like a broker, for instance, for all the different banks. So you're speaking to one person, but they're getting you potential deals from all the high street banks. Or you can individually go round every single bank and speak to them.
So not sure I'd want to kind of go round each individual bank.
It's a personal choice. Some people maybe have a relationship with the bank for many years and they feel that's the best way for them. Other people feel like maybe it's more efficient just to speak to one person. I suppose it's a bit similar like car insurance. With car insurance you can go to a broker and they're going to give you all of the market scenario.
I was going to say my relationship with my bank is usually the live chat Autobot, so it is, whatever the name usually is, but then, he never usually speak to a human anymore.
And that, well, there's different, yes, no doubt, there's different ways that banks do it, and some may have a very modern way of doing it, and others may have a traditional way. But once you have your mortgage broker or advisor lined up, so they're going to sort out the finance side of it, then you need to get speaking to a solicitor. So it's generally speaking to a conveyancing solicitor is the main point. So in the legal game you have different options. You've got solicitors who do a little bit of everything. So that means they maybe do property, they do claims, they do divorces, matrimonials, things like that. And there are solicitors out there who specialise in each of those areas. So it's understandably it's probably best to go to a specialist, but the only thing that you do have to make sure is whatever bank you're going to go with, then you have to make sure that solicitor is approved and on the panel for that bank, because otherwise then they'll not be able to act for you.
So that's actually interesting, because that's not something that I'd actually heard of. So the solicitor themselves has to nearly have a relationship with the bank that you're getting your mortgage off.
The bank is actually working for, the solicitor's actually working for the bank as well. So you have to be approved and be on their panel. And at the end of the day, it's the bank who's lending the money. They're basically the bigger owner of the property. So yes, the solicitor has to be approved. So there's different criteria. Some For instance, some banks, you have to do a set number of conveyancing transactions per year. Some might be your business has to be a particular size and have so many partners to be able to do their work.
Mm-hmm. And like, I suppose then when it boils down to picking sort of again your mortgage advisor or your solicitor, like, is there different things that you should be looking for? You know, in terms of, do you go and look for Google reviews or recommendations, or does your estate agent maybe have a recommendation on who to speak to and mortgage advisors or solicitors? You know, kind of for someone that maybe doesn't know, or their family maybe doesn't have a solicitor specifically, who do you kind of gauge off that?
Well, I think the best way to describe it is, this is how I do business with people, and I'll compare it with how a lot of people do it. So a lot of people who don't have knowledge, immediately what they'll do is they'll go out and they'll assume that, you know, if you pick a solicitor, they all know. So it's the same as any other industry. For instance, recently I needed an electrician to do something for me, and it was quite a complex job, and I've spoken to 2 or 3, and I could easily just say, what is the price? Give me your price and I'll choose the cheapest one.
Yeah.
And just assume, well, they're all electricians, so they're all going to know the job.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is, that mightn't be the case. There's a couple other things I want to bear in mind is, how do I get on with that person? Is that person able to take my phone call? Did that tradesman explain it to me in a way that I understood it? Did I feel as if he was just waffling or getting round the scenario or trying to hook me in? And it's really more about a rapport.
Yeah.
And I want to know that I'm working with somebody that I can lift the phone to, that is going to explain it, is going to be helpful, is going to get me, get it sorted out for me. And there's a lot of people just make that mistake in picking the cheapest one. Another thing is recommendations. It can be quite difficult to go with recommendations. Yes, it's definitely a good help. Certainly, if you're staying in a hotel and you always check the recommendations. But to go one step further on the recommendations is basically find out what was the recommendation, because what might be suitable for one person may not be for another. So for instance, in the legal game, if you get a recommendation maybe from your granny, when your granny is more than likely maybe have chosen a solicitor who is somebody of a similar age or maturity, and obviously they've gelled and they're on a wavelength that is the same. Is that going to be the same rapport from your granny as a first time buyer? I'm not saying age has anything to do with it, but I'm just saying it's all about that connection and that rapport.
And I suppose what they could have used that solicitor for, say 20 years ago, 30 years ago, even 5 years ago or 2 years ago, could have been something completely different to what conveyancing was. They could have come in and got a will made, or they could have come in and they get a divorce, whatever it happens to be, but they weren't buying a house. So I suppose then understanding what that recommendation was and what they maybe went to get done or sorted out was, and comparing that whether or not they actually had we used them for conveyancing as such. So
the main thing is just probably, as I say, the rapport, the connection. So the more mature person, and my experience is, the more mature person likes the more face to face, the one-to-one, coming in to see you, and the telephone communication, and they want a real connection. Whereas what we find is maybe with the younger generation, they haven't time for that rapport, they haven't time for the one-to-one, they just want it done quickly, they want the job done. They want the job done. They treat like maybe an email as like a text message. They want an answer instantly. So that's the big difference.
And I suppose both of them are actually difficult to manage as well, because if you're working on the process, for example, that's going to be difficult to get that instant response back. But as well as that, if you're trying to work on the process as well, and someone's looking for face-to-face meetings, that's time consuming to sit down and explain the different aspects of what's going on, and then have to go back and then try and get picked back up again with your work. And if you have a number of people coming in and doing that, then that's going to be difficult again. So I suppose the juggling aspect of that will be quite difficult. But something that we probably maybe actually didn't touch on there was, you know, I went off and says that I've got my mortgage and stuff, but I didn't tell you whether or not I had any money saved up, which leads me to deposits.
Yes.
Is there a ratio, or is there kind of roughly the amount of money that I should have saved for? I know we had used the figure of a house at 150,000. Roughly speaking, is there kind of like, should I be saving 10% for a deposit, or 5%, or where should I kind of be?
Well, firstly, I'm a big advocate of saving. You know, saving is something that was drilled into me as a child, and it's just something that has stuck to me. I was chatting with my wife the other day, and I think maybe something which triggered it in me is I went to a country primary school, and the local bank actually came down every Tuesday morning into the school, and you queued up and you brought your £1 coin in every week, and you saved it up, and you were comparing, oh, I've saved this much, and it was brilliant. So I think that mindset has stayed with me for years. So if you're going to buy a house, buying a house is not an impulse. You know, maybe you can go and buy something else and you can get credit on it, and it's much more easier, and you don't need any deposit, whereas a house should be something that you're working towards, and it's something, if possible, build up over years. And the more deposit you have, the easier it is to, not the easier, but it gives you more choice of the type of house that you can go for. As for how much deposit that you need, certainly by speaking to a mortgage broker well in advance. You know, don't speak to a mortgage broker just when you want a mortgage. Probably best speak to them, you know, a year, 2 years, 3 years before you're planning on buying a house, so that they can actually tell you, right, well, banks are going to ask for this percentage of a deposit, or what have you, and then at least you can then put your ducks in a row, so to speak. Another option is, if you don't necessarily have the deposit, you can have a deposit from family members. So there's nothing stopping parents or grandparents, you know, gifting a deposit to you buying your house, which is simply then declared to the mortgage broker, declared to the bank, and everything then put in place after that.
I wish. I suppose then, you know, with the deposits, and again, one of the main things at the minute is the interest rates rising. And again, it's something that we've talked about, but obviously with the higher interest rates now, is that a case of, if people are saving for their deposits, and you know they're maybe thinking about going down and looking about buying a property, well, we need to scale back sort of on that figure of, I'd planned 150,000. Should I now be going for a property that's maybe slightly less than that, to make sure that my mortgage payments kind of fits in with what I was budgeting for?
Well, this is something, I have an economic background as well, and I enjoy getting into the nitty gritty of it, and I appreciate, as a first time buyer, you know, they don't know anything like that, and they're looking at the media, and it can be a bit doom and gloom. I suppose, to give it a wee bit of a history in the economics side of things, you've mentioned their interest rates. So the Bank of England, who's the main bank in the UK, have a rate that they set, and then all other banks work from it. So the Bank of England have an interest rate at the minute, and the main purpose that they have for that interest rate is to control the economy. So that's where you hear people talking about inflation. So inflation is the cost of everything that you buy in your monthly shopping cart, effectively. So at the minute, the cost of all those products that you're buying is increasing and increasing and increasing. It's getting more expensive. So the Bank of England want to control it, and the only way they can control that is by putting up interest rates. So if they put up interest rates, then that means the cost of borrowing is much more expensive. So that means the likes of buying a house is going to cost you a lot more. So what they're planning on doing is they've put the interest rates up to try and curb people from spending, curb people from borrowing money, and then that'll hopefully slow the economy down. Now, the Bank of England meet every single month to monitor the economy, and they can set that interest rate every single month. It could go up or go down. Historically, we've had a crazy low interest rate for such a long time that the cost of borrowing has been so small. And I suppose in a way people have maybe been accustomed to that, and they've bought a lot, they've borrowed a lot, and mortgages have been very very low. We're not at a point where a mortgage today is costing considerably more than what it would have done maybe 2 years ago. So to come back to your question there, in my opinion, personal opinion, people needs the general public need to accustom their living. If it's something that they want to buy a house, well then they need to know how much is it going to cost to borrow that house, and the rest of their lifestyle has to be adopted to suit it.
Yeah.
Not simply, this is my lifestyle and buying a house and owning a house has to fit into it.
And funny, this was a conversation I was having with my partner yesterday. Is it a case of that when I go to buy a house, it should be kind of, I should be leaving myself a bit of breathing room so that I don't max myself out with, a monthly payment straight away, because if the interest rates increase, I'm already maxed out.
Yeah.
I have no breathing room here. So should it kind of be a case of, let's look at the figures. Say, for example, I could afford £600 a month.
Mm-hmm.
Do I go for something, say, for example, and 600 is my max? Should I go for something that's maybe at around 450 or £500? I don't know, like these figures could be completely off, but for an example, go for something at 450 or £500, and that gives me about roughly £100 breathing space, so that if they do fluctuate, I can absorb that kind of mortgage cost. Would that be like a sensible outlook on it, or?
Buying a house is like, and running a house is like running a business. And this is where a lot of people get it completely wrong. Quite rightly, as you say, some people just think, right, at the minute I can afford this much of a monthly payment. But running a house, that's what I said at the start there, it's all about the running costs. If you maybe have an older house, or it needs refurbed or needs work done to it, that's more money that you need.
Yeah.
So every month you should be sitting down and basically have enough to cover all the bills, still have a life, and a bit of socialising and a bit of fun, and basically you need to factor in contingencies. You need to be able to cover, for instance, if the Bank of England decide to put up their interest rates, and will that have a knock-on impact to your mortgage? Can you afford it? But ultimately, what about as well if you become sick, or you lose your job, or there's a redundancy, or you're off sick, you could fall and slip and break your leg very easily.
Yeah.
And if you rely on every single penny coming in every month, and that stops for a month, and you don't have anything to pay your bills, the whole thing comes crumbling down.
And I suppose it's understandable as well, and probably worth noting that currently with the cost of living crisis and stuff as well, that we're not advocating that it's easy to control the way that the costs are, because obviously heating prices went up and energy costs went up, electricity is up, gas is up, food prices are up, everything's just went up.
Mm-hmm.
So it's understandable that people are obviously currently struggling with mortgages now going up as well, because the interest rates are going up. But this is more from a perspective of, I'm going to go and buy a house. So these are the things that people need to think about, is the running costs, as well as what if I go and get a mortgage now. We need to make sure that interest rate there is potentially going to go up. Mm-hmm. Therefore, we need to kind of make sure that we build that into the plan as such. And the point that you did make is that the interest rates were so low that at some stage they were going to have to go up at some stage, and I suppose maybe how long do people maybe have expected it? Did they expect it to go maybe 0.5% to 1 or 2%? It's now at 5%, so maybe we didn't expect it to go as high as 5%. Maybe we didn't expect it to go 1 or 2%. It's probably a minefield to try and figure out and plot, and I suppose we could get into the conversation of remortgages further down the line, but again there are situations where you have to think about, do I go for the interest rate current, do I lock it in, do I try and go on a variable rate and see what way, maybe if the rate comes down. It's a process that you kind of, as you say, you just don't jump into it.
See, having an economic background, I have a passion and enjoy the economics. You had said there about you didn't know whether the interest rates were going to go up or not. all the experts were saying that they had to go up. I was predicting that they were going to go up. In economics, a sustainable, good economy runs at a 5% interest rate, whereas we had interest rates at less than 1% for years. So knowing that knowledge that at some point interest rates had to come back to that, I appreciate for people have no knowledge of that. They're not going to look about it. With the economy, with finances, the financial market, every day, every month, has different things factoring it, and if you're not watching it, you don't know what's happening. The problem is the media occasionally jump in on different areas.
Well, this is something that, and you can see it obviously at nearly every time that every month with the Bank of England currently, with the way that they were raising interest rates, it was like headline news, Bank of England raises interest rates. But if you don't understand what that is, that's daunting.
Yeah.
It's just like, it's at 5%, it was at 0.5, and people are kind of looking at it going, well, what does that mean for me? You hear people now saying that their mortgages are up £250 a month, and I suppose that's a lot of money to try and absorb. And I suppose that's the point that I was making about any first time buyers or people that are buying their first property needs to consider that buffer zone, and needs to consider, I can't max myself out here, because if we do go another £250 here over the course of 6 or 7 or 8 months, can I sustain £400 going to £650 a month?
Yeah.
Because that's for a lot of people that could be a week's wage, an extra week's wage on top of what they're already paying. So
it's all about affordability, and you have to nearly like having a crystal ball, even though there's no such thing. If you're just working and you're just covering all the bills when you buy the house, what about if the sofa breaks or the washing machine breaks, or you need to change your car? Where's all that money going to come from? So unfortunately, if you can't afford it from day one and you're stretching to make it work, it's not for you.
Yeah. So I'm trying to even think where we left off there. We got a wee bit sidetracked, so we did. We were talking about obviously the estate agents, mortgage advisors, picking your solicitor. So obviously we've picked the solicitor based on who we've got a good rapport with. Where do we go from there then, if we're buying a house?
So you've got your mortgage broker and your solicitor chosen. At that point then, it's kind of like a twofold. What you're going to do is you're going to be speaking with the mortgage broker. They're going to go through the application. They'll want information from you and get that approved and sorted out. And then at the same time, the solicitor is going to be getting in touch with you as well. So the solicitor is going to be starting to go through all the legal paperwork, the title deeds, the searches, the property certificates, and getting that all approved and all tracked off or checked off. And
obviously then that's the buyer's solicitor. So
yes.
I want to purchase this property. That's what my buyer solicitor is doing. On the flip side of that, then there's the solicitor
for the seller.
Yes. And what are they doing then at that time?
So they are then, it's their job and their role to get all the paperwork together to make sure the house is all, to have all the paperwork, all the correct paperwork in place, and then that's passed over to the buyer solicitor, and it's up to the buyer solicitor to go through it and make sure it is correct.
And at that stage, is there surveyors come in? Because you hear a lot about properties being surveyed, and again, does that tailor to, I've just bought a new house, I've just bought a house that's maybe 10 years old or 20 years old, where does the surveyor fit into that kind of process then?
A surveyor is brought in, I've mentioned earlier, by the bank, but the term survey is used, but I suppose it's really a valuation is what the bank is doing. The bank is just making sure that you haven't overpaid for the property. Now, sometimes those valuations can maybe make comments about structure and issues and things like that, but you can't solely rely on it. It is highly recommended that a survey is carried out by a professional, so that means you get your own independent surveyor out to check the property. Now, if you buy a brand new house or a house that was built within 10 years, you've got a comfort that the house has a 10-year structural guarantee. which is something to rely on, but it still goes without saying it's always good to have a survey carried out on the property.
And is that, like, I suppose with that 10-year guarantee, that's for any kind of, like, for example, if there's issues with the walls or maybe movement?
Generally, yes, the foundations, your walls, and your roof, basically.
Yeah.
The main structure of the house.
So, I suppose on a technical level, you don't need a surveyor, but it'd be recommended to get one just in case, because they're going to pick up on things that if I walked into a property, I'm not going to see.
Yeah. Well, it's always best to have one. It's all about reducing risk, and a lot of people look at getting a survey because they think to themselves, I don't want to spend that money. The cost of it, generally it depends on how detailed you want the report to be. Some people look at it as, I don't want to spend another £500, I can't afford it. But my view on that is, well, would you rather spend £500 to find out that there's an issue that's going to cost you £5,000 or £10,000?
Yeah.
So you're spending money. Again, it's in business. Like business, you're spending money to actually save you a lot of hassle.
I suppose again, maybe another way of looking at it is I've spent £500. They've now got an issue or found an issue with, for example, a retaining wall or something. It needs fixed.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got to fix, and it's cost me £1,000. If I don't fix it, the retaining wall's going to fall.
Mm-hmm.
So I've just lost the house. You know, at a I suppose that's a very exaggerated way.
Well, no, it's not uncommon. Something can be flagged up in the report, and that's not to say that, you know, yes, you've agreed to buy the house, you've agreed to pay a price for it, but whenever you agree to buy through an estate agent and you've put your bid in, it is subject to the paperwork and the contract, and so you're not actually committed until you've signed on the dotted line, so to speak. So there's nothing actually stopping you to go back as a buyer and say to the seller, listen, I've got a survey done, maybe you weren't aware of this, but the survey's flagged this up, it's going to cost X amount of pounds. That's, you know, it's completely up to negotiation. The seller might say, well, take it or leave it. They might say, right, well, I'll get it fixed, I'll pay for it, or they might say, let's meet in the middle in some shape or form. Yeah.
No, I suppose that's fair enough. So, like, we've got obviously then the two solicitors working on their paperwork. Everything's coming through. Say, for example, a survey's done. You know, kind of where are we at then with the, you know, in terms of a timed process? Is there, you know, a lot of people would talk about how long conveyancing process takes. I suppose it's as quick as you want and as...
It's a difficult one to answer. It's one that it's a question that you're nearly asked on a daily basis. Unfortunately, the process is taking longer now post-COVID than it did pre-COVID, which is ironic because that COVID has shifted nearly the vast majority of solicitors, the vast majority of the industry to electronic, and it's slowed it down. And the time frame, you can't put a time frame on it because there's so many factors, and it all depends how many people is involved. For instance, if it's a chain, if you're just buying a house and that maybe the person you're buying off is out of the house and the house is empty, those are two different types of transactions, and it's two different types of time frames.
And yeah, I suppose it depends, as I think you've mentioned before, like, you know, the amount of people that are involved in the process. There's no one person overseeing that. So when you try and get everyone to actually pair off with each other and gather all that back and get everything all back into one pile, for example, that's going to be quite difficult to make sure that, you know, if someone says I want this done in 4 weeks, that's not sustainable and probably not actually possible, you know, to try and get everyone pulled in for that short time frame. I suppose, as you say, it really depends on how everything falls into place, and if someone gets back to you within, you know, 12 hours, that's great, but that's only one piece of the puzzle. Someone could take 2 weeks to get back to you, and that's because they've jetted off on a 10-day holiday to Florida and is only getting back.
Yeah.
You know, I suppose that's a difficult one to try and manage, but obviously then kind of they look closer to the end of the process. We've got all our paperwork together, you know, we're further down the line now. Where are we looking then? There's no issues, everyone's happy, both sort of parties are happy, the seller's happy, the buyer's happy. Is there questions that kind of need to be answered before everything's finalised, or where are we at?
Generally, the first few weeks of a transaction, if you're acting for a buyer, from a buyer point of view, you don't hear much that's happening, but things are slowly happening in the background. This is where it comes back to what sort of solicitor, are you gelling with? So, for instance, if you prefer, if you're a person that wants a quick response, you're sent a quick email or text message, well, then you need to choose a solicitor who's able to come back to you like that. Whereas if you want that response, but yet the solicitor you're dealing with prefers phone calls or meeting you, well, there's going to be that delay in those responses and maybe cause a bit of frustration. So, as I said, in those first few weeks, things can happen very, very slowly. And then as the transaction goes on, it kind of like snowballs.
Yeah.
So generally, once the solicitor has the vast majority of the paperwork in place, some solicitors wait until they've got absolutely everything. But on average, if there's enough paperwork there, then the buyer will go in and meet with their solicitor. That's the solicitor will go through with them all about the property. So in no particular order and not exhaustively, a map to show you the boundaries, maybe a bit of the history on the property, how old is the house. When you buy a house, if it's in the town, there's like rules linked to the house as to what you can, what you can't do. Go through maybe the energy performance of the property. They'll check a few things with you if there's been extensions, solar panels put on the house, those sorts of things, and go through the survey with you as well. Hopefully after that meeting, or maybe a few days later, you've went through everything's perfect, then you can sign the contract. And then at that point, you start talking about a completion date. And that's when you work towards it. It's always best, once you know that that's all in order, only start talking about a completion date at that point.
And the completion date is the thing that everyone seems to focus on nearly, because it's judgment day nearly, where this is going to be the completion date. I get to move into my new home on that day. Is that the case? Is there, obviously things can happen? For example, someone's removal van's broke down, they can't get everything out of the house. Is there delays in completion dates, or
Well, firstly, the completion date is the day you get your keys, and as you quite rightly say, everybody is so focused on it. The big problem is that the completion date is discussed at the start of the transaction, where that is not the right time to talk about it. You talk about it at a point when everything is ready. I always use the comparison, if you've ever poured water out of a 20-litre drum, you have to go very slowly at the start, and it's gurgling and splashing about, and you have to go very, very slowly. You get the flow of it, and as soon as you get about halfway to 3/4 gone, the final quarter will just flow out so quickly. And I always use that comparison to a completion date. Whereas if you take the drum and just completely empty it upside down, it will actually pour out much more slowly, and it'll just make a complete mess. And I think that is the big problem with the conveyancing process at the minute. Everybody is talking about the completion date at the very start rather than towards the end, whenever that is the right time for it.
So obviously then, as you say, realistically we should only be focusing on the completion date kind of once the contracts are signed, and at that point then we everyone's kind of happy. Let's move towards what date's going to suit. So who's involved in making that decision on that date?
The completion date, there's another problem about it. Sometimes those completion dates are discussed just by a seller and a purchaser, but it has to suit the seller, the purchaser, the seller's solicitor, the buyer's solicitor, and the bank as well. And the bank's probably the key one, because they need enough time to release the money to you. Trying to fast track that or push it actually makes it more difficult, and it causes a lot more stress. About 6 months ago, 12 months ago, I carried out research on my business. I analysed every part of it, and I wanted to know from buyers what did they find stressful about it. And from the vast majority of people didn't find the buying process stressful at all. I then homed in to those who did find it stressful, and those people who found it stressful were getting caught up and hung up on the completion date. They were trying to control the completion date when effectively you can't.
Yeah, and then obviously as they get more worked up over the course of the process, because they were trying to work towards completion date, it became more stressful, and it became a not very enjoyable experience when it should be, especially if you're buying your first home.
Yeah.
It should be enjoyable, and I think, as you mentioned, it should be exciting.
Yes.
And again, I don't want to get bogged down into too much today, because I don't know where I already have, because we basically just went through the full conveyancing process. But there's different things like chains of transactions that people kind of forget about as well, where there could be 5 or 6 different people buying and selling at the same time, that are all relying on the first transaction to go through, for the second to go through, for the third to go through, for the fourth to go through. Is this common in someone buying a property? How common would it be for that chain to be kind of in there in the background, that people maybe aren't going to see, that until I actually get the keys to my house, someone 3 or 4 houses down on the chain can only get their keys once I've got mine, and the next person's got theirs, and the next person's got theirs? Like, how common would that be?
Traditionally, it wasn't overly common. Post-COVID, for about 24 months, that's basically what every single transaction was, which then was doubling up, trebling up, quadrupling the workload of a solicitor. And like anything, it added more people to the transaction, which was more stress and more, trying to organise it all. Thankfully, we're seeing not as many chains at the minute, so that means it's coming back to more of a normal market. But to get, even though it's a chain, the difficulties is getting all the paperwork in place first of all, but then ultimately on the day of completion can be very stressful, because you have everybody all lined up, all mad to go, and that can cause the problems.
Yeah, and I suppose, you're again, if it was only a buyer and a seller solicitor that was involved, that's only 2. But if you've got a chain, you could maybe have 8 or 10 different solicitors that are representing buyer and seller, and seller, and you're that's trying to tee all them up there to make sure that everything's falling into place. I suppose that so far, completion, once you kind of decide on the completion date, the contracts are signed, completion date's coming up, then obviously the solicitor is the one that's in charge of the money. Once the bank releases the money, are they the ones that then disperses that out to where they should be going to?
All money flows through the solicitor. So from the buyer point of view, the buyer needs to send their deposit into the solicitor, and the bank will send the money to the solicitor as well. Once it hits their bank account, then they get it sent on to the seller's bank account, and that's all electronic. Even though it is electronic, sometimes it can still be a wee bit slow, doesn't necessarily go instantly. Some banks won't release it for an hour, 2 hours, some could be 24 hours, and that has an impact on it. And occasionally banks will pull a payment as a security check, and that can take time as well. But ultimately, 9 out of 10 transactions run smoothly. Once the money hits the seller's solicitor's bank account, then at that point the keys are able to be picked up.
And I suppose at that point then your kind of transaction finalised, got the keys, I can now move into my new home. So I suppose in a nutshell, and we've sidetracked a wee bit over the course of that, but that would be the process of buying a house.
Yeah, so affordability, budget, find the right house, mortgage broker and solicitor.
And then you're good to go after that.
Good to go.
Well, I would probably say that'll finish us for this week's episode anyway. Thank you all for listening. Thank you, Roy, for the great insight. As I said before, we will hopefully be back with guests on board. We're going to be back talking about different subjects. We've obviously, that's the buying process. There's a slightly different version if you're selling a house. And again, we're gonna have people on to talk about different areas of conveyancing and obviously hot topics that are surrounding the property market. So again, thank you all for listening, and make sure to stay tuned to our Roy Dougan property expert pages. We'll have tips and tricks and different videos going out on it. If you drop a follow, and if you have any questions as well, make sure to send them in. and we'll see if we can come up with a reasonable answer for you. So thank you all for listening. Stay tuned to the next episode.
Thank you.